This is a story about medieval merchants, Kalahari bushmen, American ranchers, Arctic Inuits, and Wisconsin businessmen. We know the story by now. According to Thomas Hobbes, life without the state is intolerable for four main reasons: competition, insecurity, glory, and equality of strength. Because of this, we give up our freedom and submit ourselves to the yoke of sovereign authority. At what price? Under the point of whose spear? Under what kind of domination? To what justification? Would a person give up their capacity to decide for themselves, or to contribute to the deliberative will of the collective? Who would abandon those freedoms? The Inuits know no rulers, no person who can compel obedience. They know, amongst men at least, equality of condition. Those who seek personal glory, who bully and threaten, are gossiped about, ostracised, or eventually killed. The anthropologist Jean Briggs noticed that the Inuits lived by a central principle: never in anger. The 11th century Mediterranean was rich with an anarchy of trade, crisscrossing and skirting the basin. Maghribi merchants had a vested interest in sending goods around what was then, to these men and women, the world. But they had no time, no way of abandoning their responsibilities to go on long journeys. They could hire someone, but who could you trust? In fact, agents would take merchants' goods from town to town, city to city, country to country, paying customs, unloading ships, organising customs fees and selling merchants' goods at foreign markets. In such an anonymous world, what prevented these agents returning less profits to the merchants, embellishing the truth about the costs of transport, or outright taking the goods to sell themselves? A vast network of Maghribi traders exchanged information through gossip, letters, and meetings. One agent who lived in Jerusalem embezzled a merchant's money. He was ostracised around the entire basin, and after begging for forgiveness was forced to pay compensation before he could ever work again. Or take this letter from an agent who was transporting 2 loads of peppers. I held one load until the time when the sailing of the ships approached in the hope that the price would rise. However, the slump got worse. Then I was afraid that suspicion might arise against me, and I sold your pepper to Spanish merchants for 133 dinars. It was the night before the sailing of the ships. Pepper became much in demand, since boats with buyers arrived. I sold my pepper for higher, 140 to 142 dinars, but brother, I would not like to take the profit for myself, therefore I transferred the entire sale to our partnership. Another agent described how, after he cheated a merchant, people became agitated and hostile to me, and whoever owed me money conspired to keep it from me. The Maghribi traders left us letter after letter describing an economy of 11th century reputation. The San Bushmen of southern Africa number some 64,000 and live in tribes of egalitarian hunter-gatherers. They subject themselves to no chief, only persons of influence who should not be arrogant, overbearing or boastful, they say. The San fear and avoid conflict and share resources. According to anthropologist Richard Lee, the San say that good fences do not make good neighbours. And further north, in the Congo Basin, the Pygmies say that the forest is the chief, the lawgiver, the leader, the final arbitrator. In the 60s, Professor Stuart Macaulay interviewed hundreds of businessmen and lawyers across Wisconsin and found something surprising. Not only were contracts rarely enforced, they were treated with a kind of hostility. He found that businessmen would rather trust a man's word or seal a deal with a handshake. One said to him that they'd rather keep it simple and avoid red tape, despite often knowing that the law was on their side in an agreement. One businessman said that if something comes up, you get the other man on the telephone and deal with the problem. You don't read legalistic contract clauses at each other if you ever want to do business again. One doesn't run to lawyers if he wants to stay in business because one must behave decently. Another said that you can settle any disputes if you keep the lawyers and accountants out of it. They just do not understand the give and take needs in business. Professors Simon Holliday and Patrick Schmidt have recently said that his landmark study was an eye-opening exercise in empirical exploration. Contrary to the assumptions of the legal creed, he found a world in which law was not central, where custom and other non-contractual social practices provided order. "400 years earlier, the Jesuit missionary Paul Lejeune made the same observation when he spent the winter of 1633 with the Naskapi. He marvelled at their lack of leadership, their goodwill, their generosity, and reported that the toilsome and lonely life of the Indian in the woods made him inclined to accept a compromise in any legal dispute. His dependence upon his neighbour's aid and goodwill strengthened this tendency to work out an amicable solution, even with members of other bands." Today, expanses of the US are open range. In Shasta County, California, cattle roam, trespass, cause damage and tear down fences. Ranchers must cooperate to maintain the land, planning controlled fires or irrigation systems. Roaming animals and the politics of fences are a big part of Shasta County life. By law, the owner of an animal doing damage is liable to pay for that damage. But in Shasta County, no one knows much about legal rules. They think, instead, in moral terms. One of those moral norms is live and let live. If an animal causes minor damage, a phone call, a collection, and an apology usually follows. One resident told author Robert Ellickson that "I figure it will balance out in the long run." Another said, "I hope they do the same for me." And by law, if one person builds a fence on an enclosed boundary line, they're entitled to compensation from the neighbour. But no one enforces this, one rancher said. Instead, they follow the norm of proportionality, sharing costs and splitting labour, depending on how much livestock they each have in the adjoining fields. And there's very little monetary calculation. They'll owe favours, help plant crops, or split the time. They'll also discuss fencing first. They would never charge a neighbour after doing the work, despite this being the law. One resident said that, "I don't believe in lawyers because there are always hard feelings when you litigate." Another said, "I never press a monetary claim because I try to be a good neighbour." If a rancher is uncooperative, locals resort to gossip, which they say usually works. After all, as a species, we love to gossip. But why? In the 19th century, Charles Darwin noted that domesticated animals like dogs, pigs, sheep and rabbits were often smaller than their wild counterparts, had less sharp teeth and floppy ears. In the 1950s, Dmitry Baryaev, a Russian geneticist, wondered whether these physical characteristics were a byproduct of something else: friendliness. He tested his theory with an experiment on aggressive silver foxes. Out of a group and over generations, he selected the friendliest fox to breed, and after 4 generations, the foxes had wagging tails, droopy ears, were smaller and nicer. They had fewer stress hormones, more serotonin and oxytocin, the so-called love hormone that enhances trust, empathy and bonding. Fast forward to 2014 and a team of American scientists looking at human skulls from the past 200 years noticed that, like the foxes, our faces had grown softer, more youthful, our teeth less sharp. And this process seemed to speed up some 50,000 years ago when humans began painting more and using more sophisticated tools. It seems that humans have evolved to select for cooperation, domestication, friendliness. Our foreheads are communicative, and unlike all other primates, we have white eyes to track one another's gaze. Macaulay found that those Wisconsin businessmen who did without contracts had long relationships, knew each other well, often gossiped about competitors, prices, shared dinners, golf clubs and committees. Going to a third party to deal with a dispute would sully a relationship. One man said that no one should rely on legal rights because he would not be treated like a criminal. A Shasta County rancher said, "Being good neighbours means no lawsuits." The Semai of Malaysia have no private property, organised by assembly, and are known for their peacefulness. During a Bakara, disputes are read, and according to anthropologist Clay Roberchek, are explored from every conceivable perspective, where every possible explanation is offered until there is nothing left to say. Elders then make speeches. Before the Russian Revolution, the village communities of the 250,000-strong Siberian Buryats lived in joint families, organised into clans, tribes and confederations of generations, with 20 to 60 sharing their meals of roasted meat in shared tents. Out-of-luck families and individuals were given cattle, and loners fed and given a seat by the fire. Their Russian conquerors called them the brotherly ones. Buying and selling between them was frowned upon. Every autumn, the 46 clans across hundreds of miles met for a hunt, the Abba, to cement unity. Thousands and thousands met, but each person's share of the food had to be equal. Traditions like these, to foster kinship and community, are common amongst stateless peoples. What are the common threads that weave these stories together? Hobbes believed it was natural, followed from the laws of nature, that under basic conditions we'd be so disputatious that we'd forfeit our freedom to be the final arbiter of right from wrong, so that a leader could decide for us. But what you find, again and again, when you search for parallels for this situation, in neighbours, in business contacts, in traders, in hunter-gatherers, is a compulsion to non-hierarchical agreement, reciprocity, and a commitment to fairness, to justice. This is the rule, not the exception. This may, though, as Rousseau knew, be limited to small, local, face-to-face, closed communities where individuals either knew each other or have a common network and an economy of reputation. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm has summed up his survey of 339 fieldwork studies and said that nomadic foragers have a natural aversion to inequality and, quote, are universally and all but obsessively concerned with being free from the authority of others. all of the vain pretenses that Hobbes argued would generate violence, in fact, on closer inspection, motivate peace. When he said that competition leads to greed, he didn't give enough weight to the observation that cooperation is more beneficial. When he thought that the desire for reputation would lead to a pursuit of glory, he failed to see that reputation selects for kindness, cooperation, and conformity. The sharp tongue of gossip is the most powerful ostraciser. And when he argued that equality of strength would lead to endless war, he forgot that equality of condition, of our faculties, of the capacity for reason, leads to that most human of values: fairness. Thank you as always to all of these people who make this content possible, who support me on Patreon, which you can do for as little as $1 per month over at patreon.com/thenandnow. I'll be leaving the state of nature next, moving away from Hobbes and exploring new vistas, authenticity. I'm looking at the history of authenticity from Kierkegaard through to Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Sartre, and we'll explore existentialism then and now, and hopefully make something authentic on that topic, so look out for that. If you can't support me on Patreon, then simply click the like, the share, and the subscribe buttons. Do it now. Go on. See you next week.